Thank you. Thank you. I am just so excited. I'm pumped up. I'm really happy to be presenting with Dr. Walker. Tim and I created the Weekend of Retreats 20 years ago, and Tim has taught me so much about transformational healing, especially at the level of the emotions and the psychological, spiritual part of this. So thanks, Tim, for joining us. And I'm just also excited because I think this teaching is very important. We don't often talk about emotions and how to work with the difficult emotions like fear and anger and frustration and so on. And I think there's some really key teachings here that will be very pertinent to your lives. And I'm hoping that will provide you some techniques that will be very, very helpful along the healing journey. So without further ado, I'm going to start sharing screen here. I suspect you can see all this. There we go. So you can learn more about Tim. He's an all-around great person at thehealingcircle.ca. Good Canadian, eh? I'm going to start out with telling you about a book called The 9 Choices of Extremely Happy People. I guess I want to talk about this because you can influence your emotional life. You can, and that ultimately can really percolate down into the level of the body, release a kind of sense of healing potential. And there's a kind of science and a methodology around this. So I'm really happy to talk about this. Foster and Hicks were some corporate trainers, or are corporate trainers, who decided to figure out what were the attributes of the extremely happy people in the world. And they essentially went internationally, I think 60 plus countries, and they would do something like going into a small village. They would come up to the first person they saw and they say, please point me to a really happy person, extremely happy person. And ultimately they would get shown to the cottage of Uncle Giuseppe or Auntie Maria, and they would sit down. They would almost always, get invited in, sit down, have tea, and they would interview these people. And then they went through the qualitative interviews. And they thought that the attributes would be culture specific, but in fact, what it turns out is internationally, universally, there are certain attributes of people who can really appreciate their lives and really be happy. And I tell you it partly because people who are in that positive, grateful, centered, happy state set their intention for that. They actually think about and want to become more happy. So they do that. They're accountable, right? So they don't look out to the outside world as to what influencing their happiness as much as taking responsibility for the life. So outward conditions don't push them off the kind of centered feeling. So they're accountable. They identify what makes them happy and they make it central to their lives, right? And the other one, this is this kind of a sense of authenticity, right? It's not what others tell them should make them happy. It's what they feel within their heart makes them happy. Now you're starting to hear this, right? These are like remarkable cancer survivors. These are like the people who do amazingly well after a cancer diagnosis. So they have that opportunity, they see the stressful problems, and they find meaning out of it. They find some way to express their love and their love and spirit in the world. They're open to new options, new possibilities, in the same way that I'm not necessarily viewing your journey as simply from a Western perspective. I'm seeing that there's something bigger than this that can possibly influence your healing and big picture. They appreciate, they choose to be grateful for the things and experiences and the people in their lives. They give without expecting anything in return. They give to themselves from a spiritual perspective. And interestingly, there's this level of truthfulness, right? So if we can be completely honest and truthful with ourselves, it's like taking off a whole extra shackle of trying to be different than something that we are, and we're truthful with other people. It's like there's no deception. They are simply in this space of living, space of life. And I show you this because it really does match on to the remarkable cancer survivors that I've been trying to figure out for this last 30 years. Tim, do you want to?
I could add, Rob, that all of these things are possessed by everyone. Like you said, it's universal, that we have the capacity to access these qualities. And it's a developmental journey. When we recognize that we want to develop these qualities, we can move towards them, and we can practice in such a way that we can develop it further. So it's very helpful to have this list and to look at it and to point yourself in that direction.
And it is a journey, right? So we're not expecting ourselves to be like super happy all the time. That's not this process, but we can practice and become more and more what we value most.
Yeah.
Excellent point, Tim. So I say all that because I think it's very important to be conscious and deliberate about how you want to live your life, right? How is it that you want to be in this world? What is your best self? And so when we think about that, what value do we want to manifest from an actionable point of view, right? So I want to have harmonious relationships, for instance, is something that I cherish and I value. So therefore I choose to do that. And so as I've said before, I think setting the intention either in a tough situation or in the middle of the chaos, or I prefer as a ritual first thing in the morning, setting my intention, practicing meditation, practicing mindfulness, and visualizing, praying, and then submitting to something bigger. Tim, do you
Creating a
also
strong intention and then giving it away, letting it go. As they say in AA, let go and let God.
yeah.
You don't cling to wanting it to happen, but you just release, and then, but by setting that intention, it's already in motion.
Beautifully said. Yeah. So I take this back so we can set our intention going into this series, going to your life, walking away from this seminar today. So what is it that you want to manifest? What are we after in this whole entire series? So yes, I actually think that if you can work with your emotions and get into that physiological space, I think there's a healing potential within that just itself. It's that sense of gratitude, that sense of peace, that sense of love. When you're in that space, it really does actually release that kind of healing potential, right? And that changes the soup. Yeah, quite literally changes the physicality. Yeah.
Yeah. Hormones, etc.
We can feel better emotionally, right? And that's your best self. You enjoy your life more when you actually practice that. There's a whole idea of, we talked about this idea of like you can think more clearly and function better when you can release the negative emotions and just allow that energy to flow through you. When we're in that space, when we do our emotional work, we connect more deeply with our loved ones, we connect more deeply with ourselves, we connect more deeply with life. And then ultimately, you can also see this journey as an opportunity to grow, both spiritually and psychologically. So, and especially working with our emotions, which are so difficult at times to we're fighting against those emotional energies. So how is it that we can embrace our wholeness?
It's a lifetime journey.
It is. It's work, and we're not going to be perfect at it. It's part
of
the
us are going to be perfect. Yeah.
Integration. We integrate the difficulty. Like this is still going to be with us. It's not back to being perfect or being in Zen state. It's like being in life as it is and working at it at the same time. So, and I also want to just remember the context of all this is I believe in integrative care, which is getting the best care from the medical system and empowering yourself at levels of body, mind, and spirit. And this one, we're focusing at the level of the settling the mind or working with the mind. But that's also just a tiny piece of the pie, even just the mind part of this. So take home points. What would we like you to remember? First of all, it's normal to have difficult emotions, right? Go ahead, Tim.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
When it arises, you accept it as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going to continue to come up and down and up and down. That is, the clouds come in, the clouds blow out, the sun shines there, the sunshine goes away. It's normal. And so we embrace that. Secondly, not to fight against the emotional energy and to recognize that through evolution, we've been given this kind of intelligence, and that intelligence gives us knowledge as to what's happening. And also the emotional energy connects us with others in life.
It's a very direct connection to our environment, emotions, and pre-thinking. So when we learn to coordinate the thinking and the feeling, we get a lot of good information from our feelings.
Yeah, direct access to what's actually happening there.
Yeah.
So we're going to say that as well, we're going to work with this directly. So looking at our fear quite directly, working at the other difficulties directly can kind of take the power out, the negative power out of them, and allow your kind of life force energy to kind of manifest
You want
itself.
to transform that problematic confusion into wisdom and then use that energy to heal.
And it's there. That is your life force energy.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we're going to push you towards this idea of this compassionate approach. So it's not only compassionate self-love for yourself, but it's actually applied wisdom. So you want to be wise and smart about how you work with whatever's happening, whatever emotional energy is coming up.
Developing insight about yourself and your ways and the ways you were conditioned as a child, etc. You develop a lot of insight about yourself.
Yeah, lots of opportunity.
As you are.
Yeah. So how do we do this? So this is just basically the overview of what we're going to talk about today. And we'll do a couple of exercises for the last maybe 15, 20 minutes of the talk. But I want to give you some practical stuff. Now, I had to add this one in, Tim. So I find this fascinating. Okay, everybody, what's the emotion of the person in the top left corner? And of the guy in the middle top? And top right? So that top right is actually disgust.
Disgust. Yeah.
Like right. So
something bad. Ooh.
And bottom left, middle, bottom right. So funny that I think that we would agree that we can probably identify the emotions. Why did this happen? I'm showing this because there's an evolutionary process here. These emotions helped us to communicate to each other, to our tribes people, to our other people, right? So for instance, the top right is disgust, right? If that person's eating, smelly fish or the food's gone bad or something like that, they give a disgust look and we immediately recognize that that's bad and we want to stay away from it. Mm-hmm. The guy in the top right is actually fear reaction. So it's fear in the middle. Top left is anger, surprise, happiness. Happiness looks, brings out an attraction. Sad. So we're not only wired to express these things in our body, but it has a kind of communications benefits.
Others, in our tribe.
In our tribe, super.
There's even an energy you feel when your spouse or your partner has something going on. Even without looking at them, you can feel what's going on, right?
Yeah, agreed. And that has an evolutionary advantage. And there's a huge amount of information. So we have to recognize we are these human beings. We've been given this brain, this body, these emotional energies. This is what we're working with, right? And so how do we work with it in a wise way? So what did Bernie Siegel? So Bernie was the Ivy League surgeon who first wrote about this in the 1980s. He called it exceptional patients. I take exception to that because I think we're all exceptional in some way or form. And that he talked about the attributes of his exceptional patients. One was acceptance, right? So I'm talking about this. The corollary for you is whatever emotional state you're in right now, it's okay, just as you are. That's your starting point. You don't have to fight against that. You can work with it. You can potentially transform it. But acceptance was one of his key factors. The other one out of the 4 factors I'm going to mention is his exceptional patients were able to truly love themselves. So it's self-care, self-love, and doing the work to that. So it also matches what we're teaching around being able to love ourselves even when we're feeling crappy, even when the difficult emotions are coming up. So
yeah, that acceptance process allows you to connect with the energy that has healing power. And then there's not suppressing and not acting out. We don't have to get it out of our system because often it's painful to feel those intense emotions. But if we learn to be patient and accept it and work with it, we can transform it into energy of healing.
Nice. Radical remission. So Kelly Turner from 2014 interviewed, I think, 80 people who've undergone spontaneous remission, the people that you never expect to have recovered from their cancer diagnosis. And then she did this qualitative research and found out the 9 key factors that kind of overlap with all of them, right? And here are her 9 key factors. the first four, just a little bit physical intuition. It's like the proactivity is how I see this, but actually the middle two has to do with releasing suppressed emotion, especially from a kind of childhood trauma and those type of things, and promoting positive emotions. She's not saying be happy all the time, but facilitating the positive emotions.
Deliberately moving towards hardwiring happiness.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that you're not going to feel sad or have a hard time, but you're working toward that deliberately with an intention.
Nice. And our brains change, right? We didn't talk about neuroplasticity yet, that we're the brain is the organ that can change itself. And so we can do that. And when we have those negative emotions, allow ourselves to stay there, it actually turns off 200 different genes in our body. So the science is now showing that the emotional states actually have profound physical effects on like 200 genes being turned off like immediately.
Epigenetics,
yeah. And then there's the last of her 9 factors here, and we'll talk about some of those in the next 2 meetings. So Kelly's advice, so work on it. They're all saying the same thing. You need to do the work. She said as well, and I'm going to mention this, avoid the unnecessary distressing media, right? So take care of yourself, take care of your psyche.
Conspiracy theories on Facebook.
Yeah, there you go. Journal, reflect, practice daily prayers. I'm just going to maybe just give a quick list here to recognize that she's making some suggestions in the book. Take a stress reduction course, see a healer or therapist. I think that's really important as well.
Healing relationship, with others.
Yeah, and then it's kind of the facilitation part of this as well. So she's obviously adding some ideas, but we're going to kind of touch these in a different way. Okay, and I also just want to mention, so Jeffrey Redinger is the Harvard-based psychiatrist who also has a divinity degree from Princeton. And so he's been interviewing people who've undergone spontaneous healing or remission for the last 17 years, a huge kind of database around that. And again, looking at the overlapping factors of the people who do exceptionally well, amazingly well. And interestingly, he has, out of his 4 pillars, he says healing your identity. And what he's actually talking about is kind of a developmental psychological perspective that people gain of themselves. And you think of in your childhood, if you're in a difficult situation, you often had to adapt your behavior and therefore also adapt your perception of yourself. And that can get held into conditioning, which is kind of core beliefs, but also can get held into kind of an emotional energy as well. And as we heal our identity and come to our true authenticity and express our love and so on, that's the transformation in core beliefs and energetic relief that he's talking about.
And that's an emotional journey to transform yourself in that way.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to go in there and clean up house. Yeah.
Nice. So as I've been probably telling you for the first, few sessions as well, I think about it as creating the conditions in which you're more likely to experience the positive, the positive emotions, be in your better space, be your better self. Or the other way to say it is live out of your frontal lobe, right? And so instead of being like stressed, upset, et cetera, try more and more often to get the frontal lobe to be the part that's actually dictating your actions. And so we set ourselves up by taking care of ourselves, but
it also really a quality of observational consciousness, that you're looking back at yourself and observing and developing insight, and that creates new neurological connections.
Which feeds into exactly this point, because at the base of it, I really feel like mindfulness is key. Do you want to talk about that a bit more, Tim?
Yeah, well, I think it's that mindfulness practice, which is people don't like doing it because it's very boring and dull, but actually paying attention to your body is connecting with the more primitive parts of your brain, including the limbic system and the emotional brain, as well as the fight or flight and sympathetic nervous system. So when you pay attention to your body, you're actually gaining tremendous wisdom over emotions and over confusion, over your stress reactions. So by just coming back to your breath, I have one friend that says, you recognize that you're off thinking about something and creating dramas in your head, and then you come back, you return, and then you rest with being in the present, in your body, in the space that you're in this moment, feeling what you feel, allowing for whatever to come up. And then you get lost in thoughts again. You recognize, you return, and you rest. The 3 R's: recognize, return, and rest. So
Mm.
mindfulness then is training this for everyday life. So once you practice that formally, even just 5-10 minutes a day, then throughout the day, you're starting to connect with that same returning and that insight about your own process and about your relationships. You're accessing this kind of inner wisdom that can grow and grow and grow and get stronger.
Mm. Excellent. Yeah. Right. So simply being in the space of mindfulness also creates a calm, because it's what I
Yeah,
call the center of yourself.
right.
So how else is it that we can kind of create that calm? Well, um, actually, this is a good spot to say, if everybody could kind of stand up right now and do a little stretch. And I'm just going to kind of speak to this. One of the ideas is that we hold emotional tensions in our body, and like the deer that escapes the wolves, goes into the field and kind of shakes down that kind of energy. Exercise is doing the same thing. But right now, while you're standing up, I just want you to kind of shake it out. Oh, just let out the kind of tension, let out the emotional energy. A little bit of hum. Sometimes you can do that during dance. Sometimes you can do it during chanting or so on. You can come have a sit if you like again. But exercise is like releasing. It's like what I call a body up phenomenon, where your body is expressing the emotion and the emotion kind of is released. Very, 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 very healthy for you, healthy for your brain. I could rant about this for too long. So exercise, super important to get the brain in that kind of better space and release the kind of stress part of it. We talked about diet a couple of episodes ago. Low glycemia, keeping the sugars in a reasonable range, feeding your brain, right? You're taking care of yourself. Obviously, sleeping or napping, practicing relaxation and meditation. Tim had just talked about this idea that you can practice that skill and then integrate that into your life, and you have that whole kind of wellspring of relaxation centeredness there for you. Touch, whether you touch yourself or you touch your pet or you hug your family members or your partner, touch releases the oxytocin, which is automatically anti-inflammatory and starts to regenerate the body. Remember, we're so human that just is, that's where the energy goes in terms of finding the people in your life that you can connect with. So even just one person you can talk to and just let them know how you're feeling without the kind of sense of judgment. Again, it's just, we're wired for that, to kind of share with our tribe members. And ultimately, it's kind of also finding the balance of the things that nourish your soul. And during time of COVID, it might be as simple as trying to get outside and going for a power walk and getting into nature and looking at the trees and the sky and so on.
And all of these things is really prioritizing your well-being over your busyness and
Yeah.
over having to do things for others sometimes. And sometimes a lot of people are getting pulled in many directions by everybody else's requests and forgetting about themselves. So really sitting down with your calendar and making yourself a priority to do your meditation, to get your exercise, to eat well, to get out in nature, to connect with others. These are things we have to plan in and schedule
Mm.
to make it
Yeah.
happen.
And I would say, even if you do that as a foundation, taking care of yourself first, you're the better partner, friend,
Yeah.
family
Then
member.
everything else comes out of that in a better way.
Yeah. Creating the conditions for calm. I also think, just know, we're also wired in other ways. So to avoid the unnecessary stuff, the unnecessary drama, do you really need to blow that up? Is it really, to kind of argue with your partner or to try to correct your partner? Those type of extra dramas kind of decrease our emotional tank, our emotional energy. Just kind of let go of that one. How about I'm too sensitive, I think, to see television news. I find the images too jarring, and so what I do is I listen to CBC radio, just trying to get try to understand what's happening in the world without kind of stimulating myself and making myself kind of upset.
And
So
I think one good point too is when you hear negative news or people suffering in the world and situations that are scary and negative, we can actually even contemplate sending love to them and
Mm.
praying for healing, and may the world experience more wisdom and more compassion and evolve, right?
Mm. That's
It's
wonderful.
helpful
Yeah.
to use that triggering of our fight or flight as a, oh, I wish that things can become better. Because if we're
Yeah.
all doing that, it will be that way.
And you can actually just say that prayer, set that intention for the person who's suffering, like just right in that
Yes.
spot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So staying away from the upsetting activities unnecessarily. Um, Oopsie daisy. I wonder why Jill is drawing some lines here. So
Nice red line.
nice red line. Layla, just have a watch of that. Or you might have to ask Jill not to do that. So yeah. Okay. Very, very interesting. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, do you know what? When things happen that you can't control, we just work with it.
See the artistic quality of it.
You know what? I might just stop share and then just reshare. That might clean that one up. So yeah. Okay. So when anxiety flares, like when your presentation's starting to go crazy and get red lines on you, what do you do? Well, to recognize, be mindful, I guess, is the first part of it. Have a plan. This is a kind of interesting idea. Is we're going to run into kind of stressful situations, and to understand, we went over this last time, what your stress reaction is, so you can recognize it earlier and let go earlier. But to know what works for you in terms of settling yourself down. Do you use the breathing technique? Do you try to relax your body? Do you, what is the technique that is the best on your side? So we're mindful of our sensations. There's often the thoughts that are driving the stress reaction. And if you kind of can't kind of talk yourself down, changing the core beliefs, I can handle this, et cetera, then there are various techniques. And one of them that we're going to go over is called a breathing technique. Pretend that you're relaxed. This is what I call a body up. And you guys can do that right now if you want to. Do you want to kind of just slouch back for a second and just kind of let everything flop down, have your head, bent over towards your chest, maybe do a little yawn there, or pretend you're chewing some gum. Now, interestingly, your body is sending a message to your brain to say, I'm relaxed, because if you were in a stressful situation, you would be doing none of this, right? And so that's one way to kind of trick your
Flipping
body.
from fight or flight into rest and digest. When you make the chewing motion, the yawning, you're cultivating that belly happiness of chewing and resting and digesting.
Remember what it's like when you feel good. It's kind of like, I have to give this presentation and I'm like, ooh, I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm going to feel good at like 3:00 today. It's like, I'll be okay again type thing. So if you can remember what it feels like to be good. Yeah.
Yeah. You can have memories of different things, what's the song from the Sound of Music?
The Hills Are Alive, The
I
Sound of
don't
Music.
feel so bad. Simply remember your favorite things, right?
Your favorite things.
Neurologically, they have it's actually what we use in working with trauma patients, helping them to find good feelings in their body and then review the trauma, come back to the good feelings. It actually, neurologically, it helps you to overcome those traumas from the past.
Excellent. Body up. Talk to somebody who can listen to you, right? So again, it might be after the fact, but at least you're learning, getting stronger from that one. Okay, so I took you through this same breathing technique. Tim's going to offer a variation at the end of this, but remember, when you're recognizing that you're flustered, upset, anxious, and you have some time to actually settle yourself down, then press the pause button on the situation, and then you get up into the different part of your brain by becoming very curious of the sensations within your body. You can actually do this right now. Put your hands on your lower abdomen. In 4 slow breaths, especially smooth on the out breath, slow and smooth on the out breath. Very nice, slow, smooth breaths on the out breath. And be very curious. You're bringing your physicality, interoception,
pain.
And what you're doing now is letting go of the distressing thought, the catastrophizing thoughts. And then that allows your frontal lobe to take over and say, look, it's not worth getting upset and flustered. I can take this one step at a time. I've been through difficult things before. I can do it, right? So, and we recognize the quality of my voice is kind of a kind voice. At the same time, you're applying the wisdom of the situation.
You turn on the inner wise grandmother.
Yeah, beautiful. And
You.
you want to go ahead, Tim, and explain the sober?
Sure. So this came out of a book that I was teaching a mindfulness course to high school students, and we were using a book by a guy from Vancouver, psychiatrist, and in it they used this sober, which I really liked, and it was good for the high school kids. So it's an acronym for stop, observe, breathe, expand your mind, and respond instead of react. Sometimes when we're upset and we're in fight or flight, we just react and we say something that we regret later. So when you notice that you're in a state of anxiety or panic or fear, anger, when the fight or flight system is up, you think stop, just stop what you're doing. Then observe, just like Rob was saying, look back at your own physicality and the inner feelings. You observe what you're feeling, but you're also observing the situation from a clear place. Where am I? I'm actually safe. 99% of the time, you're safe. It's all right. And then you do the breath, just like Rob was saying, nice belly breaths, long, slow out breath. You breathe like that a few times, it flips a switch in your nervous system into rest and digest, away from fight or flight. And then, interesting from mindfulness perspective, when we're confused and we're upset, we're usually fixating on a thought. We're stuck on something. And when you expand your mind, you're not fixated, you're not stuck on something. So you expand, you look into the environment, use your peripheral vision, expand your mind. Then you see all the different options that you have, and then you can respond appropriately in a way that's helpful to others and yourself and the whole situation. We have this wisdom, we can respond, and we don't have to react in the old habitual way.
Excellent. Yeah. And that's all, it's based on neuroscience as well, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I would take you through the kind of next step, and then we'll go into some specifics. So the mindfulness piece is extremely important to be able to watch, to see the truth of what you're feeling and thinking, right? And so when that emotion comes up, then you can ask yourself the question, well, what is it that is making me feel this way? Can you bring that to consciousness?
Review.
Or view, or what are the underlying, because not every emotion is based on clear thinking. Sometimes the emotions are based on false perceptions.
Yeah.
Right? So to be able to see that clearly. The second thing is, obviously, do you need to take action, right? So for instance, dealing with an angry person, you might have to take action saying, stop, don't say things like that. We can figure this out without you being angry right now. Or you might have to remove yourself from the situation. So it's and this is not all about just being lovey-dovey all the time. It's about figuring out what's appropriate and doing the right thing for yourself in the situation.
Yeah.
Next is question around, can you honor your emotions? So instead of trying to stuff them down, say, no, I shouldn't be angry, I should be loving in this situation. You have to say, well, this emotion is giving me information. I need to honor it. And we're going to talk about grief. Can I honor my grief and allow my grief to express itself? Mm-hmm. So an expression, allowing that energy to move through you. And like Tim has taught me, and like Kelly Turnell in Radical Remission says, the patients who do amazingly well talk about not having blockages in their energy, and no blockages in their emotions, right? So the emotion comes up and the emotion comes through us. There's no block. We can feel it. We can honor it. We can express it in an appropriate way at an appropriate time.
And that's really being authentic. And other people actually respond to that really well when we're authentic. But I think we all have grown up in a culture that teaches us to suppress our emotions. Don't feel that way. Oh, don't cry. Don't be angry. We hear that over and over growing up.
Don't be happy either. Don't be too happy.
when you get too silly and giddy, you kids settle down, you know? So there's this constant sort of suppression of our emotions when we're growing up. And we have a culture that basically feels like emotions are problematic and we shouldn't have them. And if we could just be smart and just think our way through, but that's really a false idea. It doesn't work. So it's more about integrating the primitive emotional brain with the smart human brain and getting it all to work together. That's emotional intelligence.
Beautiful. So express our grief or frustration in a healthy way. And then it's like looking underneath, like what's the source of it? Ultimately, you can change your virtual reality. You can change the beliefs that you hold around this.
Yeah, that's a good point, Rob, because you said, like at the beginning, you could recognize if you have distorted thoughts about a situation or another person, then those thoughts are what you're having the emotion about rather than the reality of the situation. So often, and usually with my clients in psychotherapy, the general rule is if it's a very intense emotion, you can bet that you're conditioned and that you're thinking about it in a way that's making it worse than it really is. So, we're going to have fear, about real things, but often if we can scale back some of the ways that we're framing it in our own mind, then we begin to actually relate to the reality as it is, and we're more available to make changes and do things that help.
Yeah. And as we let go of those exaggerated fears, as we let go of those exaggerated emotions, oftentimes we'll experience more positive emotions. There'll be some
Yeah,
more
more
availability
available
there.
for it.
Yeah. So is it appropriate, right? Because this is, you have to figure this out for yourself for any given situation. To what degree, is it a real situation in which there's an appropriate emotion? To what degree can I just let go of the thought that's driving this, or even walk away from the situation? It's not worth my energy to stay there and to get sucked into this kind of vortex of emotions. I can just drop this.
Yeah, a lot of the times it doesn't matter as much as you think it does.
Yeah, that's also, the me story, personalization. Naming your emotions clearly. Now, I was listening to a talk from, I forget, Susan David, I think is her name, fantastic, again, Harvard-based psychologist, wrote the book Emotional Agility. And one of her teachings was to be able to really, when the emotion comes up, to be able to really clearly understand what that emotional energy is. So for instance, if someone said to her, I'm feeling stressed, she would actually start to explore, well, what actually does the stressed feeling, like what's the emotion that's driving that kind of quote stressed feeling? So you get a little bit more linguistic sensitivity or specificity around this. It could mean I'm anxious. I'm feeling a scared feeling about, for instance, an upcoming test result. So that's a fear that's coming, that's making them feel distressed.
Don't
It
know
could
fear.
be,
Yeah.
yeah, don't know, which is normal,
Yeah.
expected. It could be a kind of sense of frustration. You're limited. Maybe it's in the midst of COVID. You can't do what you want to do. So the stress could be actually a sense of frustration, sense of anger in kind of some underlying sense. Could be a feeling of kind of provoked by a kind of sadness about the life situation. You want more connection, or you want something that's more meaningful within your life. So it could also be kind of a grieving feeling that's provoking the stress.
Mm-hmm.
Could be just like you're being asked to do 10 different things at the same time. So it's quite a literal overwhelm of pulling away of all the energy. So disconnection, scattered feeling, right? So those all have different meanings and different ways to kind of work with them.
Yeah, and this is what we do in psychotherapy: is you unpack the true meaning underneath the kind of quick label that people put on it, and you get underneath, and then you can actually address the problem, because in that unpacking all the meaning in it, then you begin to see what it is that we need to do to resolve the problem. The emotion is there. The Latin word for emotion is emovere, which has to do with the energy needs to move out. You need to move that energy of emotion into action. It has a purpose, and it's getting you motivated to do something. Motivation and emotion are same root word.
Beautiful. Okay, so I wanted to talk about healthy grief, right? So, And again, one of Tim's profound teachings for me is that we're all grieving all the time. There are always these kind of either little losses or huge losses within our lives, and especially around a cancer diagnosis. I call it a kind of a shattering of expectation. You think your life is going on a certain trajectory, and suddenly a cancer diagnosis, treatments, all the implications, what could happen in the future. And so it's grieving because we had an expectation as to how our life would be in the future, and now it's apparently not going to be exactly like that. And so there's this kind
Changes
of
everything.
disconnect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there can be anticipatory grief about what might happen in the future. Right.
Even if
So
it's not happening right now, you still have your job, you're still actually feeling okay, but you know that you have cancer, and then you start scaring yourself.
yeah. Yeah. And all the kind of potential loss around that. So
Yeah.
it's normal to have that grief, and to, I think one of the unhealthy things is to try to push that down and say, no, 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 I just have to be positive. I just have to be happy. Whereas what I'm going to suggest is it's okay to allow yourself to grieve the losses. And hopefully, you can allow that energy to flow through you, and then you can kind of come back home to a kind of more centered point. But the grieving
Yeah.
process is the starting point.
If you push the grief down or suppress it or try to get rid of it, it's just going to come back until it's finished. So any grieving process needs to be kind of, I always call it like chewing it and digesting it. Let it work on you, let it do what it needs to do, feel what you need to feel, and get through it. And then you're available for better emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've seen a lot of people who, go through that kind of saddened period, and then it's almost as if something transforms in them. They're tapped into something bigger themselves, and they can really appreciate life. So, but
They come out the other side. Yeah.
the
There's a
part,
real process of it's kind of like the hero's journey, going through the dark caves and battling with the monster, and then coming out of it and feeling like you've achieved your victory and you're a hero.
hmm,
Yeah.
hmm. So grief has its natural course, right? So it's like, if you lost a partner, for instance, typically, or a marriage breakup, typically it's like a full year before the
Yeah.
psyche allows itself to kind of express that and feel that. The part of your heart that is stretched during grief is also the part of your heart that allows you to appreciate life more, right?
And to love.
And to love. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. And then also then just to recognize if the grief is like super profound or it's prolonged, we have to be smart about this at some point. And actually in all points we need to talk with our friends and be authentic and honest, et cetera, et cetera. But I'd also say, see a therapist or your family doctor or those type of people if need be, if this is really holding you down for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Healthy anger. So this is one I struggle with as well, because I just didn't think anger was a good thing. But now I recognize that it is a life force energy and it can teach us a lot. So there's wisdom, like why are you getting angry? Like what's being threatened?
If you dig down, you'll find something that's
Yeah,
important.
yeah,
And it may be exaggerated greatly based on your thinking. Sometimes we're just defending our ego and it's really not that important. But sometimes there's really something that we need to change in a relationship, in a situation, work, whatever it might be, or with your oncologist or your
yeah,
family doctor.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so even if it's a small provocation, I mean, maybe you don't have to be completely blown into anger, but at least there's a provocation there and you can work with that.
Yeah.
And recognizing there's some things you can't control, some things you can, and let go of the things you can't control, right? So that's
Right.
also the wisdom that kind of overrides and going into the core belief side of that. So, and Tim taught me is to kind of self-regulate first, right? This is why we talk about, creating the conditions, and also when you suddenly flustered, upset, overwhelmed, it's really important to kind of settle down, come back into the frontal lobe, so that then you can think clearly, you can see clearly, and then begin to choose how you want to respond clearly.
Yeah.
So,
Very important with anger to settle and look back and own the anger yourself rather than blaming or pointing the finger to other.
yeah,
You look back and say, what am I feeling? So that's where you really have to settle your nervous system, self regulate, and tune into what's really going on here. And then the wisdom dawns, it's there. But it's don't act out and don't suppress, but
Yeah.
just feel what you're feeling.
Feel, and you get the insight. The insight will come. So the insight comes through the thoughts, right? And then to recognize, as we've probably been through already, is that some thoughts are based on kind of more immature or different developmental stages within your life, and they're exaggerated. Sometimes they're more aggressive, and sometimes those thoughts and core beliefs are causing most of the
Yeah.
distress or the anger. So it's like
And most
being able to
times,
reframe that. Go ahead.
yeah, they're not even true.
Yeah.
We're coloring the situation, exaggerating it to the point where it's lacked any kind of correspondence with reality. And so we're angry at something that's not actually true. It's our own fantasy about what's going on. And that's the whole place of cognitive therapy, to help you begin to analyze the kinds of thoughts that create this distortion, and to learn to recognize them, to learn to let go of them, and to look again at the truth of the situation. Because we all have the intelligence, it's available to us, but we just have to organize our mind through mindfulness and cognitive therapy to pay attention and notice, is this just in my mind, or is this really the situation?
Beautiful. And ultimately, we do need to be able to express it. Sometimes that comes out into relationships. Honey, I'm really frustrated with this particular situation. Maybe we need to balance the housework a bit more. What are your thoughts? So it's like you're taking some action to, to address the emotional issue. Yeah. Kindness and integrity. Yeah.
Yeah, we
We're
can
not
do it.
going to.
It turns into a win-win. With anger is expressed skillfully. It's a win-win. It's not a power over somebody else.
Nice. I think it's also very important, especially around the cancer diagnosis, is to look at fear directly, because, and yes, Tim, you can, really offer your insight on this one, is that oftentimes we put the kind of boogeyman over there, and it's kind of, or it's hanging around, it's having some influence over us, when we can just like open the closet door or shine the light underneath the bed, and it actually just doesn't have the power that it actually
Yeah,
has.
there's a whole field in psychology of deconditioning fear, and people who have phobias and so forth, just by gently, slowly, gradually moving into the fear, you gradually decondition it and see what it's made of, where it came from, face the monster and make friends with the monster. And we could do that, especially within ourselves, with our relationships, with situations, with cancer, with everything.
Yeah.
We can look, if we spend time with it and make friends with it, the journey is easier.
So then the Sunday mornings of the weekend retreats, we actually ask that question very directly. What is your greatest fear? And what is it about your greatest fear that scares you? Like what's driving the kind of fear reaction? And
Yeah,
I know
again,
that's
breaking it
yeah,
down. Because like
looking.
man stays scary when you believe that it's scary. But
Yeah,
when you begin to say, what is this? And then you break it down, you analyze it, it begins to have many parts to it. And then you start to make friends with each part. So when you actually just spend time, and we get people to talk about it in a group, and when they do, there's a great release of energy.
yeah. Incredible buoyancy. And even listening to this talk right now could make you feel a little bit anxious, but I actually ask you just to stay with this, because when you do that, you take the power away from the fear. So what do people usually say about what their greatest fear is? Maybe half of them will say it's actually death. Death is their greatest fear, and kind of all the kind of spiritual unknowns around that. And we're going to have Reverend Dave McGinley join us, and we're going to talk about some of those issues. But what is it exactly? So you keep asking, what's going on? What is it about death that really bothers me? Why am I scared? Why am I worried about it? And why does that scare me? So you just keep deep digging to really look at it. Some people will talk about, I'm worried about the suffering, or being in pain, or being out of control prior to dying. Some people may have religious beliefs where they're worried about the afterlife, or lack thereof, type things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or they judge themselves as not ready. Yeah.
Yeah. Could be, other people just say it's the loss of their dignity. So loss of independence. I'm sorry, I miswrote that slide. Or being a burden on others. Say again, Tim?
Having to have somebody change your diaper.
Yeah. And we work with that as well, right? So how is it that we can reframe that as, part of life and part of connection and so on?
And that actually helps us to connect with family, with people, others. When they look after us, we looked after them. Now they're going to look after us.
Yeah. So we look at that. We embrace the fact that we have difficulties. We're scared of that idea. Could be just, and this is probably number one in terms of a lot of people, just not being there. The mother is not there to be there for her kids, et cetera, et cetera. Or, a lot of people worry that, if they're hurting or they die, that it will really, their family will suffer around that. And so when we look at that more directly, it actually connects us much more deeply with our family to spend the time and quality with them. And whether it's for another 2 years, another 50 years, it's like, if you do that work, you recognize that life is very sacred and that you want to connect with your family.
When you face that fear, and then you can talk with your family members about it, it opens up a whole journey of the heart with your family. You really then begin to peel off the sort of ways that we avoid expressing our love and care for each other.
Oops.
Well, that's one of those emergency
Is this
alerts.
a Nova Scotia thing?
Yeah.
What does it say, Tim?
I
Fair enough. I just turned it off too. Yeah, work with the truth. So the last couple thoughts I want to talk to you about is this idea of the second arrow, or poisoning ourselves. And it's the idea that we judge ourselves for having our emotions. So the life is going to happen, and the first arrow comes in and hits us, and it hurts, right? We have to deal with the truth of the situation, and we're going to feel the difficult emotions. But the second arrow is you pull out the first arrow and you stab yourself again, right? It's like you're saying, well, I shouldn't have that emotion. I'm angry with myself. I'm frustrated with myself for being, upset or angry, et cetera, et cetera. So we're poisoning ourselves. Yeah. Shouldn't feel this way. So self-compassion overall is the most effective way of letting go of that extra suffering, right? So we're going to have some legitimate suffering as we go through life. We can be kind to ourselves and really minimize all this extra layer of suffering that happens. So I'm going to take you just through a quick exercise based on Christian Neff's work. So it's around self-compassion, and it's fantastic kind of science-based work. Difference between, it's very easy to be compassionate to others. We're wired on that side. So we need to use that kind of deep sense of wisdom for ourselves, right? So I'm going to imagine a time when a friend came to you. So you're the friend, and the friend is coming to you, and they're saying to you that they've gone through a big failure. They made a mistake. They did something that they regretted. Then they felt inadequate in some way or form. So they're really heart to heart letting them know they feel crappy. How is it that you talk to them? What is it you usually say? And how do you say it? What's the tone of your voice? What types of language? Like, what are the words and sentences that you use? How do you relate to them? What does your body language tell them? Okay, so your friend has opened up to you, they feel awful, and then I'm asking you, how do you respond to them? Okay, so imagine that. Now, secondly, imagine a time when you were struggling, right? So you were the one who did the big mistake, had a big failure, did something you regretted, and then were feeling inadequate within a relationship or not. So you're feeling lousy. So then how do you talk to yourself, right? What do you usually say? How do you say it? What's that tone of voice of that inner voice? What types of language do you say to yourself? What are the words and sentences? How do you relate to yourself? What's your body language, or what's the feeling within your body at that point? So is there a difference? almost everybody would say that they're much harsher on themselves than they are on their friends, right? Your friends, going through a tough time, you say, oh, geez, that really hurts, doesn't it? And, you've got that kind of quality of kindness and empathy, et cetera, et cetera. But when we talk to ourselves, often much more judgmental and kind of finger pointing. Okay, so that's the difference there. So why is it that we don't like to do this kind of self-compassionate piece? Why aren't you willing to kind of do that for yourself? Well, people have lots of different reasons. They could say it's kind of like, I don't want to pity myself. It just sounds so, weak in some way. Or self is self-centered, it's egotistical, it's all about me. I've been taught not to do that. So that's another block. Or could just sound really soft, really wimpy. And we could break all these down and say this is the reason why self-compassion isn't those things, but actually the science kind of proves it for itself. And what the studies show that if you're self-compassionate, it's the best way to work yourself through a psychological, spiritual growth. People who are self-compassionate have less anxiety, depression, stress, shame, body. So they have a lot less of the negative emotions. Generally speaking, they're much happier, more satisfaction, more grateful, optimistic. They're appreciative of their body and their life, right? So when they're self-compassionate, they actually take care of themselves. When you're self-compassionate, you see your body as sacred, you're willing to actually do those things, to exercise and to eat well and advocate for yourself within the medical system. Better coping, resilience, adaptation. They are definitely rated better as partners, right? More understanding, better communication.
When you're kind to yourself, you're also kinder to others.
Yes. How you treat yourself is how you treat others. Yeah. It's the same set of rules. The big point is that you can actually learn this, right? There's you learn the techniques, and it's been proven if you practice these techniques, there's less depression at a year, for instance, anxiety, stress, and emotional avoidance. You're more likely to be proactive and take on the difficult situations. So when we're self-compassionate, we give that same kindness and care that we would give to a good friend, right? So now you become your own best friend, your best grandmother. And there's 3 elements to this. Think about it. If you're walking down the street and you see a woman who essentially lives on the street, how is it that you're going to recognize that she's suffering or she's having a difficult time? So 3 elements to this. You have to notice. You have to be able to see them, right? You can't be just looking at your phone all the time. You actually have to be able to see what's happening. Mindfulness.
Within yourself.
Within yourself, yes. Have to be able to see that they're suffering, right? So it's kind of a heart space of, oh, ouch, this hurts, whether it's the woman on the street or it's yourself. And lastly, it's this kind of realization that this is part of the human journey, right? Suffering and failure and difficulty. And, if but for the grace of God go I, it could be me on the street here. So that kind of sense of shared humanity. Okay, so we'll ask you to kind of stand up again for a second here and just look at our time. Yeah. So self-compassion, just you can put over your hands over your heart right now. That's a self-compassionate action, right? It's a kind of self-soothing. Instead of being at odds with life or fighting life, you're actually kind to yourself. And I want you to assume one more posture. It's harder for me to do, but I want you to stand up, nice, strong martial arts stance, the fists clenched lightly at your sides. This is kind of strong stance. That's also self-compassion. You're willing to stand up for yourself. You're willing to have the discipline to do what's right. That's also self-compassion. In the same way, you can sit again, in the same way, the mother who's got a elementary school child, and the child goes to the mom and says, Mom, I don't want to go to school today. I just want to sit at home and eat ice cream and watch movies. The compassionate mother does not say, no problem, dear, you just stay at home and just have a good time. There's no problem. The compassionate mother says, you need to go to school. School is very important for you, and we're going to eat our veggies along with dinner, and maybe you get a little snack as well, but you're going to take care of yourself, right? So there is a sense of kind of yang energy that says You need to do this, the proactivity part. Oh, yes, the inner critic. The inner critic causes stress. You're criticizing yourself and or the recipient. It's normal. This is what happens. We develop that as a psychic mechanism. We don't have to listen to it, I think, is really the takeaway from this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of therapy goes into helping people recognize the messages that they've incorporated, the tapes that they're playing in their head, you know, your father, your mother, whatever it might be, and the ways that we criticize ourselves, our teachers, our priests, or whatever. And all these critical voices, we have to take responsibility and say, no, now I'm in charge. I'm not going to listen to that anymore. That's the second arrow. It's not helping me.
Mm-hmm.
With mindfulness, you're aware that you have these voices and you begin to say no and to tame them and work through them. Make friends, and
Make
then
friends.
you're there as a positive force.
Yeah.
You can transform the negative parent into the positive parent.
Right. I mean, they have their role. They're letting you know if there's a problem. We just don't have to over exaggerate.
Yeah.
So I want you to go through a very quick self-compassionate break exercise. So imagine yourself in a difficult situation, right? So life is showing you this. It is stressful. We don't have to minimize that. Now, how do we actually give ourselves a compassionate break? So in the midst of it, you can say to yourself, you recognize it. Oh, this is difficult. So this is a mindfulness piece, right? This is a moment of suffering. And if you don't like the word suffering because it sounds like too much Jesus on the cross, it could be a moment of distress, or this is difficult. And lots of different ways to say that. This hurts. Ouch. This is stressful. Right? So just is identify, this is what I'm feeling, right? And recognize my voice, the quality of my voice now. Ouch, ouch, this is stressful. It's a kindness to it. Second step to that is suffering is a part of life, right? This is what happens to people in my situation, right? It's our common humanity. Or you could say, other people feel this way. I'm not alone. We all struggle in our lives. And the
So
third,
often people are judging themselves because they're experiencing suffering. But if you really look at the truth, everyone has their issues and is working through something. And we can be kind to ourselves because we're all on the journey of working through this stuff.
yeah, and part of that is you guys are listening to this talk right now, and you're connecting with like 60 people in the talk at the same time. So it's less a feeling of isolation. This is what people who've had a cancer diagnosis go through. Yeah. So we can put our hands over our heart, right? So it's this kind of soothing, empowering, and then you say to yourself something like, "May I be kind to myself," or depending on the situation, what do I need to hear right now to express kindness to myself? And maybe, may I give myself the compassion that I need? May I accept myself as I am? May I forgive myself? May I be strong? May I be patient? So just a summary, notice, you say something, you soothe yourself, you do some sort of self-affirmation. So the slides will be there for you if you want to pick that one up. And we're going to finish with a self-compassion abiding explanation exercise. And so this is from the Center for Nonviolence, and that's their contact information.
Oh.
And this is it. It's the abiding exercise called Lesson, Lesin. Going to go for it, Tim?
Yeah, sure. So this is actually developed by a wonderful woman who's written a wonderful book recently called Welcoming the Unwelcome, Pema Chudran, who's really a best-selling author, a Buddhist nun. And she taught this at a workshop that I went to. And then I kind of expanded it a little bit and enhanced it. But it's really a practice that you can do, especially when you are feeling, when your emotions are out of control and you don't know what to do, you can do this. So I give this to all my clients. And so this little acronym is very helpful. The first thing we need to do is just locate this feeling in our body. So because we have the tendency to think about the story and the problem and blame the other person, if we just come back to our body, there's some innate intelligence in our body that will help us to work through this. So we locate the feeling. And this is what many different forms of psychotherapy do. There's something called focusing, somatic experiencing, which I do with people with who have trauma. So tuning into the body's intelligence, we begin to actually feel what we're feeling. You want to progress to the next slide, maybe, Rob, and we'll just
Sure.
go.
Do you want to go the
Yeah,
explanations?
yeah. Maybe what I could ask people to do is take a minute and just remember the last time that you were upset and the situation seemed insurmountable, and you get that diagnosis and you just panic, or whatever it might be, or you're waiting for those test results, or you're having a conflict with your doctor or your partner or something. Just take a minute and remember that time when you were feeling upset, and see if you can actually reclaim. You don't have to go into it 100%, just even 10% is okay. Just close your eyes for a minute and connect with that feeling that you had when you were upset. You can remember the situation, where you were, what was going on, the other people in the situation, yourself, and then that inner bodily feeling. See if you can reclaim a bit of that. And then we ask ourselves, like, where do I feel this in my body? Is it kind of a burning in my heart? Is it coming up from the belly? Sometimes it's a knot in your belly. Sometimes it's tightness in your neck and shoulders. It could be even like you want to make a fist and punch somebody. It could be all these different sensations in the body. So you listen to your body. Where in my body am I feeling this? And then what is the quality of that energy in your body? Is it like fire? Is it like some kind of intense electrical energy? Is it a dullness? Is it a dull ache in your belly? Is it a stuckness in your throat that's preventing you from asking for help or speaking your truth, asserting yourself? Somewhere in your body, this energy, and it has a quality like a storm. It's either like a lightning storm or a big windstorm. So you're starting to really break down and comprehend with your neocortex and your frontal lobe, your intelligent brain, your human brain. You're looking at the limbic system and the emotional brain and making a connection with it by feeling the energy. The next step then is to embrace that. And that's where we turn on the self-compassion. And really the best image is if you had a little 6-month-old who was crying and very upset, and you're having a hard time comforting this little 6-month-old, what do? So we hold it, comfort that little baby. So in the same way, you take that feeling that you have in your body and you begin to send that same kind of mothering energy as if you're holding yourself as a little baby. That part of you that's upset is like a little baby having a temper tantrum or having colic or just feeling really upset, not knowing what to do, feeling powerless. So we embrace that part of ourselves. We comfort that part of ourselves. You can talk to yourself kindly. It's going to be okay. I'm safe right now. I can work through this. I have the intelligence and the wisdom to work through this situation. So we embrace the feeling with loving kindness, with that sense of separating out the upset from that part of us that is wise and knows how to look after ourselves. You can access these different parts of your brain and use them together to accomplish this compassionate abiding. So embracing the feeling as if it was a suffering child who's just skinned their knee or broken an arm, or someone who's been bullied. Love and embrace that child which is within you. Then this is the next important part, and part of the mindfulness of this is that there's a storyline that goes with this, and that's where the cognitive therapy part comes in. We need to actually stop thinking, stop our thinking, stop the storyline, stop projecting it outside of yourself and blaming someone else or going over the situation in your head over and over. As soon as you notice that, repetitive thinking, you stop it and you come back to feeling in your body. You use your body as an anchor and then embracing yourself. So you come back to the locate and the embrace and let go of thinking about it. All that old thinking is actually part of why you're so upset, because the way you frame it to yourself is making it really intense. So you let go of the thinking. When we can release ourselves from the conceptual frames that are creating the problem, we can drop into a deeper place of intelligence. And when you kind of recycle through these locate, embrace, stop the thinking, locate the feeling, embrace it with kindness, stop the thinking, eventually you're tuning into a deeper level of intelligence. And we all have basic needs as humans. And so somewhere something is not quite right, and you need to identify that need and then decide that you're going to proactively move and motivate yourself with this energy of the emotion to get your need met. A need for connection, a need for respect, a need for communication with someone, a need to assert yourself, a need to be loved, a need for accommodation of your own frailties, your own difficulties, accommodate your fear. We all have different needs. We have physical well-being needs, of basic needs of air and breath and food and exercise and sleep and our sexuality and safety. And we have needs for connection, acceptance, affection, appreciation, belonging. So we have this list of needs that comes with the compassionate abiding exercise. So learning about the basic needs that we have as human beings and honoring our needs, and then learning how the emotional energy is trying to help you to get your need met, but sometimes it gets caught up in a confusing storyline. We cut the storyline, locate the feeling in your body, and then comfort yourself like a child. And then you are intelligently identifying what you need, and then you're committing yourself to proactively go out and get that need met in a way that's helpful for you, in a win-win situation with the other people involved. So there's really a process here of developing, through a contemplative exercise, you're developing emotional intelligence. You're gradually using the smart part of your brain to observe the part of your brain that's freaked out, the limbic system and the sympathetic nervous system, the dinosaur brain and the mammal brain. And you're learning to comfort that and look at that and pay attention to it and make that neurological connection. But it takes time and patience with oneself to do that. So that's the lesson. Learn the lesson and practice.
Practice. Yeah.
So really practice it over and over. Then you get good at it, and then it eventually becomes second nature.
Nice. Yeah, and to recognize we're not trying to satisfy all our needs at the same time. It's when the emotion comes in, then we can start to understand what's driving that emotion.
Yeah, this intense feeling is there for a reason. That there's some need that you've been ignoring, and usually we're just so hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not about correcting other people; it's about just softening the way we are with ourselves.
Beautiful. Well, let's end there and recognize that we're an hour 15 in. Layla, do you want to ask some questions from the chat box to start out with?
Yeah, we've got some good ones. So first question, is there a difference between being content and being happy? Content seems to be an easier benchmark to reach, whereas happiness connotes a kind of exuberance. Which are we aiming for?
Yeah, I would first of all, I'd just say I don't think happiness is the highest value in my mind, but that's me personally. I think it's more important to have meaning in one's life, to be able to express one's love, that's my value in the way that's best for one. So I do worry about giving slides that says the 9 attributes of extremely happy people, when I think that kind of sense of content kind of describes some sense of centeredness. Content, in some sense, you can kind of hold content and difficulty at the same time, whereas it's hard to hold happiness and difficulty at the same time. What do you say, Tim?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good point in the person's talk presenting. We have a course in the work that I do called Contentment in Everyday Life, and that's where you start from. Can I be content? And that has a lot to do with acceptance. Contentment is a very powerful thing to practice. Rather than being irritated and angry about something, can I just accept it as it is and work with it and overcome it? So contentment has this kind of workability quality
Yeah,
to it.
yeah,
It is interesting because when I first started practicing psychology and many years ago, we would have thought that happiness, Freud said that it's just not possible. And so it's interesting that Rick Hansen in the looking at the psychoneuroimmunology and the
yeah,
hardwiring happiness, there is a way if we actually focus on what makes us happy and spend a little time with it, just even a few minutes a day, and smile and look into it, we can actually begin to hardwire, we can proactively, um, deliberately hardwire happiness. So I think there's something to that. And it's not, I always like to say happiness is an inside job. It's not about getting the big car and the right house and the right thing. And if everything's perfect, then I'll be happy. It has nothing to do with external situations. Things can be really problematic, but there is within us a kind of spiritual core. And when we can tune into that, there's this shining energy that's always there. And that's where happiness comes from. It's deep on the inside. And it's really a spiritual thing. But the more you practice it, sort of psycho-spiritual development, you begin to access it, it gets stronger and stronger. And then that's a path that just keeps going and going forever. So
beautifully said.
happiness is not impossible.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question. I find the notion of taking care of oneself before taking care of others well and good, but much more complicated when young kids are involved. The boundaries between the needs of others and one's own needs are less clear then. For example, mom can't go off and meditate when her toddler is in distress. How much is this an individualistic model?
Well, I could share that I was meditating before I had children for 10 years, and I was really deep into it and everything, long retreats. Then I had children, and most of it went out the window. So I admit, I agree. And, it's a practice looking after children. But once you establish kind of mindfulness approach, you can apply that to everything. And the guy that brought mindfulness into the medicine and into society, John Kabat-Zinn, wrote a fantastic book about mindful parenting. And it's really just once you turn on that attention, you can use every situation in your life to practice mindfulness. So it doesn't have to be just sitting on your cushion in peace. It can be relating with a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum. And you bring yourself into the moment, feel your own body, feel your own reaction, look at the child, examine what you know about what can help, and then you relate to the situation. Rather than reacting with the way your parents reacted to you, you can be present, use your intelligence. So the mindfulness is something you can use in every situation. So we are all conditioned to be helpful to others, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's really ultimately that's why we're practicing, is so that we can be of benefit to others.
Well said. I mean, we value wonderful parenting more so than spending time in meditation, right? So, but Tim is basically saying we can integrate both of them together. So yeah, what do we value most? Well said, Tim.
Next question. Is there a risk that
Got another
self-compassion...
question?
Oh, sorry.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there a risk that self-compassion interferes with accountability?
Right. Yeah. So Christian Neff gives such great talks, and her book is clear about this as well. Some people say, I can't be, self-compassionate, then I would, I wouldn't do anything. So I was hoping that the kind of the example of the mother telling the child they have to go to school and they have to eat their veggies, the compassion piece. And it's also why I got people to stand up and take that strong stance, because you do need a proactivity, you do need a strength, you need these kind of discipline, or, at least there's a proactivity that says, I'm going to do the right thing. I value this, and I value myself. I care for myself so much that I'm willing to do the right thing. So it's an integration. Peace.
Yeah, I think the most self-compassionate thing to do is to be completely accountable. You really understand how the universe works, and that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Everything is interconnected. Your kindness and your taking responsibility for your own mistakes and being responsible for being accountable for things is fundamentally self-compassionate. So they're not separate. We've been taught this kind of weird system of, too weak or too strong, but it's really, you can bring it all together. You can be kind and strong at the same time.
Nicely said.
Wonderful. So that's it for the questions that people have submitted. So we'll just do an official wrap up for everything. And then if people have time to stick around, we can have some follow-up questions. So to anyone who has to leave right now, thank you so much for attending the webinar today. And of course, thank you to our two speakers for discussing this very important topic with us. We still have 2 more webinars in this series coming up. The next one is on December 9th. So that's another Wednesday, 2 weeks from now. And in that session, we'll be talking about nurturing a spiritual perspective. And that will also feature another guest presenter, Reverend McGinley. So hopefully you'll all be able to join us for that one as well. And take care, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, Layla. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Layla, very much.
Happy